Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending where you're joining from. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar on strengthening South-South cooperation on critical minerals for a just energy transition. This is being jointly organized by SEforALL, UC Davis, and Swaniti Global. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available online or on our respective institutional websites, as well as on the council page, and we will share that link shortly. Attendees will remain muted for the duration of this webinar, but if you do have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom to insert any questions that you might have. We will try our best to address these during the panel discussion round. Now, without further ado, to get us started, it is my great pleasure to invite Damilola Ogunbi, who is the CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and co-chair of UN Energy, to please deliver the opening remarks. Damilola, are you online? I think we might be facing some technical challenges. So perhaps we can give it a couple of minutes and move to the scene setting presentation. And then once Damrola is back, we can have the scene setting remarks at that point. So perhaps at this stage, handing over to Sandeep, Dr. Sandeep Pai, who is the director of the Global Climate and Development Institute at Swaniti Global, to deliver the scene setting presentation on behalf of the three partners. Sandeep, over to you.
Thank you so much, Divyam. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Just let me know if everybody can see it.
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So first of all, as Divyam said, I'm absolutely thrilled to invite everybody who has joined this webinar, and I'm absolutely thrilled that everybody has joined because this has been a labor of love for almost a year, and it's really, really nice to see, it taking shape and for us to take it to the next level. So what I will do in the next 10, 12 minutes or so is I'm going to provide some context of what is the context of this work and what we have set out to achieve, and what are very exciting partnership plans to do in the next few years. So I think I just wanted to put this slide to underpin why we need, the world has already warmed by 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we see headlines this year that we are at 1.5 and we're seeing so many impacts, and so we need rapid transitions. And then I cannot emphasize more the need for a rapid clean energy transition. But this clean energy transition requires a lot of critical minerals. These critical minerals are required not just in the energy sector, from defense to every aspect of our life, but even if we just focus on the energy sector, the scale of the critical mineral required is huge. Take an example of electric vehicle. I mean, you need graphite, you need lithium, nickel, cobalt. So the whole idea of this work stems from the fact that we need to take bold action. We need a lot of these minerals, and we need to do it fast. So just to underline that point, I just want to explain. This is a graph by the International Energy Agency, which shows that in their sustainable development scenarios, the scale of these minerals required, if you zoom into specific minerals like lithium, we need 42 times more lithium than what we have today. We need 25 times more graphite than what we have today. And similarly, so almost every mineral requirement will increase into the future. But there are, over generally for almost every country, there are a few risks. At a very general level, there is a risk of price volatility. We have seen that mineral prices have surged, although now they have come down again, but overall they still remain high. And this has prevented many investors and miners to invest, and this remains a big challenge. Um, Second, I think a general challenge is there is concentration of these resources. Today Australia produces 50% of lithium, 70% of cobalt comes from DRC. A lot of this is known, but I think it's important to really emphasize this, that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket or few baskets, or a few eggs in one basket. So this concentration of resources could be a major challenge. If something were to happen to a certain country or a region, this could disrupt supply chains globally. And the final and very important kind of challenge is that a lot of what is required for the future has not been built. Almost 80 to 90% of mining and processing projects have not been built. And so the scale at which they can be built has the potential to be a supply chain bottleneck of the future. So, but beyond, the general challenges, we zoomed in on global South countries. We did some sort of like engagements with various leaders, think tanks, to kind of understand what are some of the key barriers, what are some of the key challenges. And I list a few. There are many more, but just to give a flavor of what those challenges look like, there are technological gaps in several global South countries. Those countries with coal reserves, looking at coal waste to critical minerals, the technology, the thinking around that needs to develop. The whole challenge about newer technologies around refining. Skill gap is a major challenge. How do you train so many skilled professionals who can work in processing? There are gaps around governance and regulatory conditions to do expansion work. ESG, another big topic, and I will speak to that like in a slide or two later, is another sort of like, how do you do this work sustainably? How do you do this work from by making sure that justice aspects of this expansion are taken care of? And finally, like every country is sort of thinking about this in terms of industrial policy. And so how do you build a robust industrial policy and so on? And so these are some of the challenges that we heard over the last year or so, that many global South countries are thinking about. I want to highlight two major sort of areas where we feel there is almost an immediate need to do work. One is, global South countries absolutely play a critical role in extraction, but lack processing capacity. So we've just put out some graphs here. I mean, if you look at copper, for example, almost 60-70% of copper extraction is in developing countries or global South, but processing is very little, very almost less than 15 to 20%. So if you look at rare earths, although there is some extraction, a bulk of those processing happens in China. So that I think is a really important sort of aspect that we need to think about, that global South countries should focus not only on extraction, but go all the way to higher up the value chain, and that is also important for higher GDP, local job creation. So there's a need to move up from upstream to downstream, upstream to midstream to downstream. The second and very key aspect of this is, any kind of mining has risks. I mean, I have spent my entire career working around mines and communities and so on. So any kind of mining has risks, start right from the beginning of when you set up a mine, when there are booms and busts, how the community interacts with it. Sometimes it creates good jobs. Sometimes, there are many challenges in this area. And given that bulk of this hasn't been built, there is a great opportunity as well to make sure justice in this transition. And we need to zoom in and think about it from an environmental, social, and governance point of view. Start thinking about, How do we deal with tailings? How do we deal with working conditions? How do we deal with, I mean, these are examples of issues around any kind of corruption and things like that. These would be very crucial, not only from a justice point of view, but also that this should not become a bottleneck um, for deployment that is required at scale. So we believe that there is a strong need for South-South collaboration. Um, this South-South collaboration could have a unified vision aligned with Global South ambitions for industrialization and job creation. The Global South countries could together explore favorable trade and technology agreements. Um, they can explore, impact benefits, community benefit agreements, create model community benefit agreements, that can become a standard. And finally, I think a lot of global South actors. We have interacted with private sector. We've looked at public sector, state-owned companies. They are looking for investments, and so there is a lot of opportunity for joint investment in mines and processing. So with that, I am absolutely delighted that the three organizations, Sustainable Energy for All, UC Davis, University of California, Davis, and Swaniti Global have come together to form the first of its kind partnership. And this webinar is the launch of this partnership, which in a few months will culminate into a Council for Critical Mineral Development in the Global South. And it's been an absolute honor to give this presentation and explain, what the future plans are. So we have a few objectives. The most important thing is to bring together key producer and consumer countries in the Global South. And the goals are to secure critical minerals required for their energy transitions. That, I think, is the overarching goal. Definitely support ambitions for local value chain creation, and also promote sustainable and inclusive transitions for the local community. So we really emphasize the justice aspects of this as well, along with securing the energy transition minerals, along with making sure that global South countries are able to move up the value chain. We also want to really emphasize and double down on the justice aspects. We have three pillars. We are going to do a lot of work. We have already a lot of governments and companies have already shown interest, and have asked us for certain types of technical assistance. We will also do capacity building on some of the gaps that I was talking about previously, and we will identify very specific opportunities for collaboration and partnership between governments. So let me just give you a flavor of what some of this demand-driven research would look like. So some of the research would be like at a country level, using very country level data. We are going to do modeling for demand supply, like what would be the future demand in a net zero or 1.5 degree scenario, and what would be the sources of supply of those minerals. We will do quite a bit of research around understanding value chain, supply chain, and then we will also work towards creating model community benefit agreements. These are just examples. These are initial ideas that governments and companies are interested in partnering with us. But as this council is launched, there will be multiple levels of research and engagement. Next is capacity building. There are lots of information gaps, knowledge gaps, and we will host very technical and very non-technical types of capacity building sessions. There could be sessions around ESG standards. There could be sessions around industrial policies. There could be sessions around model community benefit agreements, innovation systems, and so on and so forth. And finally, this is, I think, a very, very important goal. Like, our goal is to identify, specific mines, specific processing facilities for joint investments. We want to bring those companies, those governments together that have the same priority, that are looking to do, similar type of investments, and can they form partnerships to undertake such investments. We will definitely also work towards joint messaging to amplify Global South voices in many, many forums. Right now, we have envisaged this work in two phases. in the first phase, we will work with 6 governments. When we do the launch of this council, we will reveal the names of those countries. We're still forming up our partnership with those countries. They represent regional diversity. They're very interested in partnerships. And for them, critical mineral is also a national priority. After 2 years, as this work becomes successful and we learn our lessons, we will, in the second phase, we have ambitions to engage with 20 countries. And that will include more opportunities for partnership, more engagements, more research, and more capacity building. So I think today also marks the launch of our website, of our partnership website. So I encourage everybody, there's a lot of information material on that website. So, and we will post it in the chat as well for people to look at it. But you can also check it out. It's www.transitionmineralscouncil.org. So I really encourage everybody to go and check out the website. We will continuously update the website, and we're really excited with the launch of this website as well. So thank you so much. With that, I hand it back to Divyam, and I'm once again really grateful for everybody who has joined this webinar, for supporting us in this endeavor.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for taking us through the focus areas of the partnerships, and we're all very excited about what's to come. I now turn back to Damilola, who's the CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All, to deliver her remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so sorry about earlier. I was having some technical challenges. I hope everyone can hear me now. And thank you, Sandeep, for your great presentation. So it's a pleasure for me to be delivering these remarks at this webinar. We're really excited to announce a significant new partnership focused on critical energy transition minerals. As you're all aware, for the Global South, energy transition goes beyond electrons and kilowatts. It's about improving access, fostering development, and supporting industrialization and job creation. As the pace of transitions accelerates, it is imperative that the Global South plays a central role in global supply chains for energy transition technologies and solutions, benefiting equally from opportunities for industry development and also job creation. Through programs such as the African Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiative, SEforALL has been at the forefront of supporting countries and enterprises in their ambitions to manufacture modules, batteries, and electric vehicles locally in Africa through South-South collaborations. Governments are showing bold ambition, aiming not just for local assembly, but also to add greater value to upstream segments. I'm very pleased that we're joined today by the Minister of Lands and Resources from Ghana. Ghana has prioritized local processing and refinery of its lithium reserves to increase value along battery supply chains. In fact, many critical mineral resources required for manufacturing energy transition technologies are in developing countries. Yet, their processing and refining, as well as manufacturing supply chains, are concentrated elsewhere. At the launch of the UN Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, the Secretary General emphasized that developing countries cannot be shackled, cannot stay at the bottom of the clean energy value chain, merely as suppliers of basic raw materials. It has to be additive. We need to address the development of critical minerals with a focus on both justice and security of supply. For producer and consumer countries, international and South-South collaboration will be crucial in mobilizing the partnerships, investments, and the know-how necessary to secure mineral supplies and build inclusive value chains. This cooperation is especially important for ensuring that local communities share in the benefits. I am also pleased to welcome the participation of the India's Ministry of Mines in today's session. We recently concluded an intergovernmental study tour with a high-level delegation from my country, Nigeria, visiting India to learn about their electric bus program, the design and the implementation. These are the basic things that we're talking that have to happen for us to really ensure South-South collaboration. Today, we are proud to announce that Sustainable Energy for All, UC Davis, and Swaniti Global partnerships. This partnership represents an important collaboration approach to boost our efforts to build an inclusive platform to facilitate South-South cooperation on critical mineral development. This platform responds to the need of governments for tailored support on partnership, building from data and analytics, as well as knowledge sharing. Crucially, it also aims to amplify the voices and priorities of the Global South in critical minerals and just transition discourse. We are really, really glad to have a spectrum of people that we're going to engage, from governments, multilateral, bilateral institutions, finances, industry, local partners, as well as the most important group, civil society. Together, we aim to build a collaborative framework that advances the goals of critical mineral development in the Global South. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and also noting the importance of looking at critical minerals development in the Global South from both the security of supply and justice lens. And now with that, handing over the floor to Dr. Aditya Ramji, who's the Director of India and Global South Clean Transportation Center at UC Davis, to moderate the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Divyam. It's really a privilege, as Sandeep mentioned, to be moderating this and to be part of this very exciting and unique partnership. And just before we jump into the panel, I'll just briefly introduce our speakers for today. We will be joined shortly by Honorable Minister Samuel Jinapur, who's the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources from the Government of Ghana. We have Dr. Veena Kumari Dermal. She's the Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Mines from the Government of India. We have Greg Radford. He's the Director for the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals and Sustainable Development, that we also know otherwise as IGF. Dr. Marit Kito, who's the Director of the African Minerals Development Center, the African Union. Miho Shirotori, the Director for the Division on International Trade and Commodities from UN Trade and Development. And Amy Bullinger, Executive Director of the Initiative for Responsible Mining Association. This is a stellar panel that we have today, and all of you are at the cutting edge of the narrative on critical transition minerals today, and we're very privileged to have all of you. I see Minister Jinapur has joined us. Minister, thank you very much. I know you have another meeting, so maybe I'll begin with you just to kind of get this conversation started. Ghana is among the world's leading producers for manganese and other minerals that you've been recently identifying as part of your resource endowment. What is the government's vision for a sustainable approach to scale up transition minerals while you look at ensuring that that the benefits of this kind of accrue to the local economy and the communities in Ghana?
Well, thank you so very much, and thank you for having me. And let me say a big hello to these distinguished panelists you've assembled for this very important discussion. I think the question you've asked is an extremely consequential one. As we are all very much aware, the green energy transition has become a very phenomenal feature of the energy program of the world, and also the efforts, the global efforts at halting climate change. And I think that there's no point retreating the fact that this is where the world is heading to. And fortunately, if we put in place the right framework for Ghana's critical green minerals industry, we should be able to derive a lot of beneficiation out of it. Ghana has enormous commercial quantities of these green minerals. We have manganese, we have lithium, we have graphite, we have bauxite, we have literally all of it. And the government of Ghana, under the leadership of President Akufo-Addo, is taking the view that we should put together a policy framework even before we begin the exploitation and management of these minerals. And so, following that thinking, a policy framework has been put in place here in Ghana, and I will take a bit of time to give you the contours of this policy framework. The first is that the government of Ghana is taking the position that these minerals should be exploited sustainably. So the adherence to the strict principles or standards of ESGs are very important to us here in Ghana. So in the exploitation of these minerals, we need to ensure that they are exploited sustainably. Second is that we need to add value to these minerals, and which is why in the policy we have taken the position, and in some cases we've been legislated that under no circumstances should these minerals be exported in their raw form. As you know, Indonesia is taking that view too. Tanzania did the same in 2017, and several countries are going along this path. Ghana is taking that view as well. And thirdly, and quite importantly, it's also to say that we should have indigenization of the industry. Indigenization of the industry to mean that we attract foreign capital, we attract foreign investments, and we welcome foreign investment, and we are creating a conducive environment to ensure that there is security of investment, there is maximum returns on investment. But at the same time, we structure partnerships which will ensure that this industry is indigenized. And some of the components of the effort to indigenize the industry are that one, we are insisting on a robust local content and local participation framework. We are, for example, insisting on the listing on the Ghana Stock Exchange, which will get ordinary Ghanaians and Ghanaian private sector to buy shares and hold equity in all of these transactions. We are also insisting that arising out of the value chain, which will emanate from adding value to these critical minerals, there's strong Ghanaian participation. So these are the components of our policy framework for the exploitation and management of green minerals generally, manganese as well, and other minerals such as iron ore, bauxite, and lithium. And as you may be aware, we've entered into a transaction with Atlantic Lithium, an Australian company listed on the London and New York Stock Exchange. And these principles of our policy have all seen expression in the transaction which we closed with Atlantic Lithium. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Just to follow up on your points, what are some of as you implement some of these policies, right? These are not the easiest to do all the time in reality. Would you mind to kind of elaborate a little bit on what are some of the key barriers that the government of Ghana faces while implementing some of this, and where you think are potential opportunities and the value for the South-South cooperation that we're talking about?
Well, first of all, I think that when it comes to the barriers, the obvious ones are very much there for all of us to appreciate. The mining architecture of Africa generally, and the mining architecture of Ghana in particular, has been one that I have had an occasion to describe as a dig and ship type of mining architecture, which is that you take the mineral resources and you ship them in their raw form. So to jettison this kind of architecture and seek to introduce a new one, and one which is departing, if you want, from this architecture or this framework of just digging the mineral and shipping it, will naturally come with some kind of challenges. And in all the negotiations which we've entered into, and in all the arrangements we've put in place, whether policy or legislative interventions, you've had this difficulty, which is the issue really is the change. People having difficulty to adjust to change because foreign investors and companies have been used to coming into our country and coming into Africa generally just to mine these resources in their raw state and ship them out of our continent and ship them out of Ghana. President Akufo-Addo and his government since 2017 have said no to that, and I've actually gone ahead when it comes to the issue of, for example, when it comes to iron ore resource of a country, we've legislated and said that the iron ore resource of a country should not be exported in their raw form. When it comes to bauxite, we've legislated and said that the bauxite resource of our country should not be exported in their raw state. Lithium, we've done the same thing. And so the point I make to you is that the whole fear of the new paradigm which is being constructed here in Ghana is one major barrier. And of course, the other one is putting in place the requisite infrastructure to support this policy framework. So, for example, if you say the bauxite resources of your country should not be exported in the raw state, you then also have to create the linkages, the railway, the port system, and power system, and all of that to support this very ambitious and robust value addition industry you seek to create in your country. So that is another one. What opportunities do they create for us? I think the opportunities they create for us are enormous. Because, I mean, if you take the lithium industry, for example, when you take electric vehicles, Bloomberg, for example, estimates that at the highest end of the value chain, we are talking about 7 trillion United States dollars at the highest end, which is what exists in places like China and the United States, where you now begin to manufacture electric vehicles. We're talking about some 7 trillion United States dollars. At the resource extraction and resource raw material or resource state, you're talking about 11 billion United States dollars. So you can tell, you can see the gap. The gap between being a raw material producing lithium or manganese country, as opposed to adding value at the highest end or even at the middle level. It's like there's a gulf between these two parts of the value chain. And so the opportunities are big, and Ghana in particular is also seeking to construct an automobile industry. And if we are going to construct a successful automobile industry, to mean that we get the requisite supply chain which will feed into the automobile and several other industries we seek to create. So the opportunities are many, and the opportunities are enormous, and the impact it will have on our national economy will be huge.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Minister. And hopefully you can stay with us a little longer and we can come back with more questions. But to your point of being able to build out a downstream industry and automotive ecosystem, I can almost see another partnership with India, which is one of the major hubs for this ecosystem in the developing country ecosystem. And with that, that's a good segue for me to maybe move to Dr. Veena Kumari from India. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you, there has been a lot of momentum in this past year and a half in India as well, with its G20 presidency and so on, with India's announcement of the critical minerals list, the creation of KABIL as India's public investment arm, and now a critical minerals mission that you're leading. Could you tell us a little bit more about India's vision around critical energy transition minerals, and what are some of the priorities within the context of energy transitions?
Thank you for inviting India to be part of this group to discuss about the South-South cooperation. And also I congratulate UC Davis, Swaniti, and SEforALL for coming together to work for this very important subject, which is going to contribute a more rather than contribute, decide about the energy transition for the world as such. As many of you must be knowing, India was doing a considerable job towards securing the critical mineral for the country. Our main idea is that we don't have much of the resources of these minerals. So we were taking many essential steps for securing the supply so that our ambitious target of clean energy can be met. So in India, we allocate the mineral concession through auction. That is the methodology. And what we have done is immediately after coming with the list of minerals which are critical for the country, we have included a wide variety of wide sectors to decide the list. It is not exclusively energy transition. We have taken the fertilizer minerals as well as the telecommunication, everything all encompassing. And after that, we have given a special status to 24 of those minerals, and we have taken the power to auction this mineral at the level of the central government. And in November to March, we have put around 38 deposits for auction, and the auction process is ongoing. And after the general election results are announced, we will be coming out with the outcome of the auction. So we are very confident that most of these mineral deposits will be taken up for mining in the coming months. So we also have kind of announced a portal for National Geoscience Data Repository. It is a portal in which all the geoscience data of the country, which is the Geological Survey of India's exploration data, is available in a single place. And this data is available for free for downloading and also doing all the required kind of analysis. And then we also we have this Geological Survey of India, which does the exploration for the country as a whole. And we recently in 2021 have also allowed participation of the private exploration agencies in the exploration in the country. So we have kind of increased the number of projects in the Geological Surveys exploration plan for critical mineral. Now more than 1/3 of the exploration plan, we say the field survey projects is now is aiming towards identifying the critical mineral deposits in India. And also, as we all know, India is part of many of the plurilateral and multilateral engagement, and we are part of MSP and Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. And we are hoping that these partnership will help India to not only like we, as you have very Mr. Dr. Pai has very rightly told, it's not about mining alone, it's about processing and beneficiation, where most of our countries are lacking in, or we don't have the required know-how. So we are looking towards this partnership to have the know-how for the processing and beneficiation. And this Kabil, this is Khanij Bidesh India Limited, is an entity which is created by 3 of the government companies, and it has been given a mandate exclusively to go out of India and look for the deposits, so that India can have some deposits through a government body, government funded company. And accordingly, we have had a like in January, the Kabil has got has signed an agreement with in Argentina, in Catamarca province of Argentina, with the one government company, Camian, to have exploration and mining rights for 5 lithium projects. And we are working towards starting the exploration work here in Argentina. And yes, we are now working for a critical mineral policy. We have a national mineral policy. Now we are working towards for a critical mineral policy. This policy, we are trying to, we have different components, like we are trying to address the issue of supply, then processing, beneficiation, then like how we can encourage our companies to go and acquire mineral assets in other countries, how to adhere to the ESG standards, and also like how to encourage within India the research on critical mineral. And also we are looking to also towards encouraging the students to start looking towards mining as a very good subject to study, because in many countries mining is associated with lots of negative vibe, which we wanted to remove, because now in India at least we have a very good system in place. And we will come up with a mission or a system, so that in an established system in place in the ministry to implement the recommendation of the policy. See, these things which we are planning to do may come up in a time frame of 3 months. That is what we are trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veena ma'am. And I'll go around the panel and so that we can have time for maybe another round. But and I completely agree with you. I mean, it would be very good to actually see countries encouraging more and more fundamental research to be able to and attract more talent into this space. I think we need a lot more people to be thinking around some of the most critical questions around minerals, especially in the context of climate. But as we've heard from Ghana and India, and as we look at countries trying to export minerals, trying to secure minerals. Miho, this is a good time to probably bring you in and kind of think about, trade and development narrative in the context of minerals has started to become very interesting. And from whatever I've read, I don't think we've been able to find that sweet spot yet, but it has various dimensions and complexities associated with it. And so just to kind of it would be good to get your thoughts on what changes do you think the current international trade regime might actually need to address some of these issues and to create a fairly transparent and fair trade ecosystem, that can allow some of these global South countries to play a more equitable and fair role in global value chains.
Thank you, Aditya. Really would like to thank the organizers for inviting United Nations Trade and Development, and such an honor to be with you, Excellencies and fellow participants, panelists. On this question, this was exactly the question that 194 UNCTAD members discussed during at its 14th session of Trade and Development Commission on 22nd of April. Of course, they recognize the danger of the crushing, sort of the conflicting objectives and priorities. On the one hand, we have clean energy imperative at the global level. We really need to make sure that all the components and parts that are required for the products and services important for energy transition should become accessible and be affordable. That is very important, obviously. But that is the question of economic efficiency, and that might call for very low mineral prices. And also maybe the concentration is not a bad thing from the perspective of economies of scale. So it is very clear that that can really conflict with this structural transformation aspirations of many developing countries, particularly critical energy transition mineral producing countries, if there's no coordination. Now, at UNCTAD, they did not think that these priorities were mutually exclusive. The decision that they came up was that what we need is a balanced approach, in the international trading system. And balanced approach is something that allows us to, and they came up with two very important aspects for the balanced approach. Number one, we need to keep market open, and we need to make the market of critical energy transition mineral transparent. At this moment, we don't know much about the price and the quantity of critical energy transition mineral traded between countries, and they are not often disclosed. And this lack of transparency can promote illicit mining and illicit trade. So we need to make something, the balanced approach that makes sure that the market is open, but there's a transparency. Number two, there's also a very important element. The balanced approach is something that helps us avoid policy actions that result in zero-sum gains at the global level. Now, let's talk about the green industrial policies. These green industrial policies have to be inclusive. What does it mean? Many developing countries, many critical energy transition mineral producing countries cannot afford green industrial policies like many major economies. So if the current existing green industrial policies to become inclusive, I think it is important that it really has to facilitate the transfer or sharing of knowledge, technology, and skills that they acquire through their green industrial policy across countries, with the CETM exporting developing countries or CETM importing developing countries. This is very, very important to make green industrial policies inclusive. Mind you, we are not saying it's going to be easy, but this is some aspiration that we have to maintain. And for this point, this is the final point, Abhijit. and that member states also acknowledged that South-South cooperation is probably a very useful framework for achieving this, to keep market open, make the market transparent, and also make sure that the green industrial policy is not just, it's not going to be just to exclude some countries from benefiting. Make sure that the benefits from learning will be shared equally. And on this point, I think that Dr. Veena has already mentioned the importance of India looking into this South-South cooperation framework. It is probably nice to create a new one. There's also potential to use the existing framework. I don't know how many people actually know about this framework called Global System of Trade Preferences among developing countries, or GSTP. GSTP is not only about tariff concessions. There is Article number 4 of GSTP says there's a potential for countries to get into sectoral agreements, long-term, short-term contracts or certain segments. And this may be a moment to try to look at it with a new perspective and see if this GSTP could be useful. Over to you, Abhijit.
Thank you so much, Miho. I think those are very pertinent points, and I definitely don't envy your role in trying to actually navigate some of this complexities. But I think that is so important to think about how countries can align their industrial policies within some of this narrative, and being able to deal with the different dimensions around communities, around fair trade, and being able to and kind of help and kind of be able to access better information to make better decision making as they go along. To that, Dr. Kito, let me come to you. This is therefore a very interesting time for Africa as a region, and the role of the African Mineral Development Center. There is so much going on in terms of extraction, processing, even other downstream industrial development in the region, which can provide very unique economic opportunities, but also comes with its own set of challenges. How is the African Green Minerals strategy that you've been working on kind of helping realize this vision, and kind of see, and where do you see the role in implementing some of this over the coming years?
Thank you very much, Ramji, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting the African Mineral Development Center to this very relevant conversation, and congratulations on launching your council. We always welcome South-South cooperation in whatever form, so hopefully we can join in at some point as well, but we are very happy to see that the Global South is coming together. I was listening to the presenter from India, and she was saying that they don't have these minerals, but fortunately for us, and I heard also the Ghana counterparts, we do have them in our continent, 30% of reserves or more. And as you know, Africa is not adequately explored, so probably it's much more than that. And suddenly, lithium and others have become critical. I mean, they've been existing for a long time in our soils, but suddenly they've become critical, and then all the others. But as you know, historically, Africa especially has not really benefited. And as the excellency from the honorable minister from Ghana, I'm going to quote him. He said, "From dig to ship." I used to say pit to port. But essentially, it worked as an enclave where mining is directly shipped out of the continent and without any linkages to the continent. And then for all of the skills, the technologies, the infrastructure is only to go to the port and then shipped out. And the railway roads you can see abundant, just following the trail to the port. So for hundreds of years, it has not been beneficial. So that's why we in Africa developed the Africa Mining Vision. That was 15 years ago. And just a reminder that at that time, there was another boom, commodities price boom that had gone. And that was that realization that puts African countries together to come up with a vision. 15 years on, now we have another momentum that is created with this decarbonization agenda. But we feel that, this time around, we have the how do you say, the critical mass, or I mean, this realization that no, we cannot pursue it like it was before, and we learned the mistakes of the past. So with the last 15 years that, this AMV has, this Africa Mining Vision was set out, it looks at it from a holistic point of view throughout the whole value chain. Of course, we look at the policies, the regulatory frameworks, and the minister was mentioning them. And Ghana, by the way, is our good adherent to the principles of the Africa Mining Vision, because he talked about linkages, he talked about value addition, he talked about downstream, he talked about policy framework. Maybe he didn't mention the geology, but we also focus on the geology. I mentioned we need to know what we have on our soil. We also have to look at the artisanal small-scale mining, which is very much prevalent in Africa, and making sure that they're formalized. There are millions, and they have to be part of the formal economy. We look at the environmental and social impact as well, and I like the intervention from UNCTAD, who's advocating for green industrialization. We all aspire to that, but how do we do it? And now the main adding value of the AMV is actually the linkages part, the one that we talked about, the value addition, the infrastructural mining, and the Honorable Minister talked about some of the barriers for industrialization that we face on the continent: infrastructure, energy, the big one, capital, financing, and of course, skills and technology. So after this, we developed this Africa Mining Vision, we had the action plan, and now because of this impending decarbonization agenda, and as was seen, I was following the presentation from the beginning by Dr. Pai. He talked about the demand for these minerals, and then the rush, so to speak, and so we have also developed in our continent the African Green Mineral Strategy. Why we call it green is because, as I mentioned, criticality is in the eye of the beholder. The definitions are different. In the UN panel of the SG, it's called critical energy transition minerals, which means that it's critical because it's the energy transition, not because of defense, not because of vulnerability of supply. But in our African continent, we decided to call them green because they are inputs to the green industry. And we have elaborated a nomenclature on why we classified them. Most of them overlap. Of course, we have the lithium, the graphites, but we also have our own unique ones like titanium used for the hydro. We have phosphates. Iron ore is not considered critical in some jurisdictions, but it is for us in our green mineral strategy. So we have developed this strategy. It follows the Africa Mining Vision mostly, and it's very much on the value addition side. But we have 4 pillars. The first one is advancing the mineral itself, meaning exploration, the earth institutions, the geology, very important, as I said. And then for that, we have special programs. The governance side is important, transparency, making sure that there are no leakages, revenue management, which is important as well. The second pillar is on the skills and technology. As I said, we can talk all day if you don't have the required skills throughout the whole value chain, from lawyers to even for value addition, all the skills around mining, around exploration, around mining engineers, geologists, but also beyond that, all the skills that need to be had in order to have a concrete downstream mining industry on all that. So technology and skills are the second pillar. The third one is on the value addition itself, leveraging on existing trade, like the African Continental Free Trade Area is for us the big one in Africa. But, as was mentioned by UNCTAD, there's still a lot of distortions in the trade that we have to navigate. And making sure that, we're not just talking about, value addition, because we know that what's required, and that particular strategy looks at each, for instance, it goes for cobalt. What would it need to go to the next stage of refinement, processing? What kind of energy, what kind of skills, technology, mapping it, and then where to acquire it from? Because some is very concentrated. Some of the skills are very concentrated in some areas, in some jurisdictions, how to acquire them. Because we are in this market, we are all in the same, except maybe for China as advanced, but we are still all the same because we get asked, and the barriers that, the minister from Ghana was mentioning are there. but how do we address them? Energy is a big, big one. How do we, if you want to stay clean as the green industrialization and not use coal or gas or fossil fuels, do we go hydro in Africa? Do we go geothermal? Do we go all of these things? These are a lot of complex issues that are there, and it's planned out in this green mineral strategy that we have. It's planned out on the options, especially financing is a big, big issue, very capital intensive. The minister also talked about leveraging capital markets, which is what we advocate for, and also classifying our mineral energy in a way that we can leverage the capital markets to have a critical mass of African or continental investors so that the value is retained on the continent. So basically, the African Green Mineral Strategy is there. We are still consulting about it. There's still no decision. We just had it for consideration during a special technical committee last week. We are still consulting. It's not finalized, but once it's finalized, it's really, like I said, and the fourth pillar, sorry, it's about mitigating the social and environmental impact. We should not, because now we are concentrating on this value addition, but of course we have to think about the next generation. We have to think about the environment and the impact, the social impact on the local communities, the women. There is a lot of women in mining. I talked about the artisanal small-scale miners, but also the communities around the mines that have health impacts, social impacts, and by nature, digging, exploring, it damages the environment and affects populations. And how to address this, need to do cost-benefit analysis. And at the end of the day, in Africa, our biggest problem is poverty. Not only just poverty in terms of money, but also energy poverty, because we're also trying to get 600 million people out that are in the dark also to benefit from this energy transition. And this strategy also talks about this electrification of Africa as well, because when you jump to renewable, if you see Irina's recent data, 1.5% only renewable energy in Africa. So we are going to be, again, missing out on that. So we want to make sure that we industrialize, but also we electrify through green practices. And I'm glad that Anktad was saying that we need knowledge sharing on that. So I think it's very crucial. Knowledge sharing is crucial. We appreciate South-South cooperation, and we look forward to having a continued collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Keter. Couldn't agree more with you on the need for this kind of cooperation. But also, I think we should commend African Union on being able to think holistically about the strategy, being able to address not just the minerals, but also communities, thinking about associated infrastructure. How do you green the value chain and not just, certain elements of it? And I think that is really the need of the hour, to be able to do a little more systems thinking that we need to enable global South countries, both producer and consumer countries, to think about not just the raw materials, but also how they can create opportunities around the ecosystem as they navigate and try to meet their own energy transition goals. And you're right. The idea of criticality is in the eyes of the beholder, which actually is a good segue for me to bring in Greg. Greg, the IGF was created back in 2002, but the current narrative didn't really exist back then. But some of the dimensions and issues have always been associated with the mining ecosystem for years. And for the lack of a better phrase, I should say today, the mining world and the climate world are almost on a collision course, and we want to avoid that. We want to be able to have that narrative that we can make it part of the solution and less of the problem. What do you think, is the way forward, given these differing objectives sometimes that can come in, both from producer and consumer country context, and the work that IGF has been doing?
Great. Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to hear about the launch of the council and the work that they're doing. So thanks very much on behalf of the IGF. I think we heard earlier a really good summary about what some of the challenges and also the ESG challenges, as well as the needs of mining going forward. We obviously know that mining has potential for significant environmental and social impacts. but we also heard about the importance of minerals and metals for the energy transition. So if we look at, the energy sector, for example, it results in 40% of global emissions. So a transition to renewable energy will require a significant amount of more minerals and metals. Copper, for example, we heard about copper earlier. Copper is used in every single renewable energy technology. So, what is, I guess the question is what is the way forward for the mining sector and compared to when the IGF started? And I view it as there's a need to completely redefine mining. The status quo is unacceptable. We're not going to be able to achieve our climate targets if we keep mining the exact same way. So new technologies, innovation is absolutely essential to change how mining's done. This can include technology to operate a zero waste mine, a zero water mine. There's some global industry companies that are doing a really good job moving towards those goals. We're seeing some fully electrified mines. We're seeing an increase in renewable power at mine sites to displace captive coal power projects. We obviously need to reduce GHG emissions across the entire mine life cycle. And there's some interesting initiatives for remining tailings. So it's not just about increasing the supply, it's also about greater recycling to reduce the demand. Recycling numbers are very low across many commodities, and there needs to be a significant increase in recycling. And then there's and remining tailings is something that's receiving more attention. And there's a really interesting initiative called Regeneration that's being organized by Resolve and some funders. That's remining tailings, but also resulting in the old areas, bringing nature and biodiversity back into those sites. So it's not just increasing supply, but it's improving nature. And we've heard a lot today about the need for local value addition, and this actually has to happen. And it's probably one of the more important things in how mining has to be done differently. That local value addition, and the complement to that is stakeholder consultation. It needs to be broad, it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to really get people engaged. We're seeing, for example, a growing number of mines globally, operating mines that are being proposed or shutting down due to public protests, legal challenges. We're seeing a few countries in Latin America where this is happening. So stakeholder engagement, stakeholder consultation needs to be significantly improved to ensure that communities and Indigenous peoples are actively engaged, in particular in the areas of local value addition. So from us at the IGF, we really support the collaboration across the Global South. It's something that we also work and strive to. And so we're very keen to participate and work with all the others on the call today that are interested in trying to promote a better mining sector that protects people, that protects the planet, and achieves our climate goals. So interest of time, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Greg. And talking of stakeholder engagement, Amy, what IRMA does is not easy, and that is really being able to bring together communities, but also industry together to really be able to move towards the solution rather than the barriers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the IRMA standards are, and how do you actually work with your different stakeholders to actually operationalize these standards?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Aditya, and congratulations to you all on this incredibly important endeavor. I'm so thrilled that this is happening, and agree with so many astute things said by other speakers, and mostly the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA. We'd love to be a resource to you. And so IRMA has a standard for responsible mining. and now an expansion so it can be used for mineral processing and also for exploration and development for the sites that don't exist yet. It has been built over the last 20 years and very comprehensive and covering gender justice or human rights, indigenous rights, protecting worker health and safety, but then also clean water. How do you manage waste? And the issues that have been raised by so many of you. While it's quite comprehensive and detailed and describes what are best practices, it's not pass-fail. So a mine can come in at any point in its journey or a processing plant and set a benchmark for where it is now, but show improvement over time. And we hope it'll be a resource to you all because it is voluntary. And so the work that we do is never going to fulfill nor replace nor compete with the critical work that many of you are doing and that Greg is doing in bringing governments together, where governments set the rules that all operators have to follow, right? But of course, governments have had so much pressure to house people, to feed people, to take care of healthcare, all of these other issues. And often mineral extraction has been seen as a quick fuel of money to cover all of these tremendous responsibilities. But as so many of you have said, also seen as a resource curse, where it's being used as a pressure to not regulate and protect environmental and social values and the impacts. And we have a real shift moment happening in that right now, where if you look at the 6 houses that govern the IRMA standard, it's the only mining standard globally which is equally governed by civil society working across the table from the private sector. So you've got at that table communities affected by mining, NGOs who are their advocates, labor unions, and then also mining companies, their customers who make cars, jewelry, wind turbines, technology, etc., and then the finance sector. And there's this healthy tension there so that you can begin to have the asks of civil society or governments who are trying to protect water resources or human rights, asking for the same things that the end brands are asking for, as they say, look, you know, we who sell the car or the laptop or the phone don't want to be tied to this harm at the raw material point. And when you look at a lot of that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about global South countries can't afford to ask for better practices, but in fact, now we know that often they must. You have these end brands and others not wanting to be tied to that harm. Dr. Pai, Dr. Vermal, you spoke earlier about the whole issues around the bottlenecks and the conflict, and that there's really no supply chain security as long as there's not community consent happening. And when you look at these first countries coming in, it's so exciting because the first places where audits against the IRMA Center are happening: Zimbabwe, South Africa, Chile, Brazil, Senegal, Mozambique, Argentina. The first self-assessments that are getting ready, this other 80 sites coming in, they're in Gabon, they're in Zambia, they're in the Philippines, in New Caledonia, Liberia, Indonesia, Panama, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Sri Lanka. I mean, it's just an amazing list of countries across the global South who are already using this tool and saying, look, we want to distinguish ourselves as sites where these materials can come from for energy transition that aren't tied to inherent harm. And so we'd love to be a resource to you as you step into this work.
Thank you, Amy. And I know I have another 10 minutes, but just to use that time effectively, I can do a quick round of questions with all of you. Dr. Veena, maybe just to come back to you, you know, you talked about what India is doing and how you're framing some of this thought process. But one of the issues, or rather we've encountered over this past year and a half in our work is, you know, it's equally challenging for countries to do integrated assessments, right? Because now you're having to think about what will happen on the demand side. How do you plan? What do you have domestically? How do you source? What do you need to source from outside? And it's not necessarily easy. But so what kind of data and information gaps do you think exist today that can be plugged to really enable countries like India to support your decision-making process? And you know, to some extent, that also, I guess, goes to how some of that correcting information asymmetry can enable greater South-South cooperation in the region.
Thank you. Basically, when we talk about the information gap, see, the requirement, the demand projection is one which require a multidisciplinary approach. Say we have different ministries handling, one handling about the transportation, another about the renewable energy, and another about the communication. So there is this requirement for a multidisciplinary approach for data collection. So we in India, what we are trying to do is we are trying to engage with the many think tanks, and we are setting up as a part of our critical mineral policy, we are proposing to set up exclusive think tank for data analysis and data like that projections data analysis. So based on that, currently we have this gap about the requirement in a very detailed. We have data, but it in a very higher level of data, not the granular data is not really available. We are trying to create that data. We are trying to, means like collect information, each ministry's target, and then for achieving the target, the requirement of the critical minerals. It's a backward calculation which we need to do. That is, there is a gap which we identified that there is a gap, and we are trying to we already have a think tank in place only a few weeks back, and we are trying to collaborate with some of the international associations also. So that's where we stay. Our policy addressed this issue, basically the issue of the data analysis and data asymmetry is being addressed by the policy, but it's a continuous process. You will agree that the data which we are having today is going to be changed, and IEA also has come up with a report a few weeks back. So it's a continuous process, and there is going to be a continuous system in place so that we are not lagging behind for our planning due to the data asymmetry.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Veena. Miho, maybe a good time to also ask you this, right? I mean, we talked about how some of this information, you mentioned rightly, we don't even have some of this information available today on mineral flows, prices, but from a larger, international trade framework perspective, and UNCTAD is playing this role also of serving as a secretariat for the UNSG's panel. So I guess two-sided question. One, what is the role that you think UNCTAD and other institutions can play in being able to address some of these issues around nomenclatures and streamlining data for this? But also, how do you see this larger global institution framework generally being able to deliver on what hopefully will be the vision that will be set out from the Secretary General's panel over the next few months?
Okay, thank you very much for extremely good two questions. Number one, on data. United Nations it's our role is to become a provider of the common ground for data collection. Right? We don't necessarily go around and collect data by ourselves, but we want to make sure that there's a correct standard common ground for collecting the data that we need. One example is this UN framework classification. I think many of you actually know that was developed by UNECE, Economic Commission for Europe, and that looks at the mineral projects from the perspective of also the environmental sustainability and social dimension as well. So that is a kind of classification framework. We also looking at now, we are creating at this very moment of the database of access agreements. Every minute, as you know, that there is a bilateral, trilateral agreements on the access to the critical energy transition minerals across countries. We are collecting the information, and also we are looking into the FTAs, free trade agreements, that may be thinking of talking about arranging something on the critical energy transition minerals. And this is the database, evolving database, and we hope to make it available on our website very, very soon. Nomenclature side also we are looking at it, but again, in collaboration with other agencies, UN agencies. Now, going to the second question, very important about the panel of SG for the critical energy transition minerals, where you already have the panel members here. It's nice to see you, IGF, and of course, like Dr. Merritt, participating in the panel discussions. And for the future, of course, what kind of institutional framework would be important to make sure that whatever the principles agreed by the panel would be implemented is the panel's decision. And panel's decision to be included in its recommendations to the SG. But one thing we think it is very, very important. Yes, UNCTAD being the secretariat of this panel, we provide all the substantive reports and materials to facilitate the discussion, but it's not only us. It is important to acknowledge that the entire UN system is behind it. And also from that perspective, I think if that's the entire UN system, it is important that the monitoring will continue. So perhaps it's something like the approach of high-level political forum of monitoring the SDGs happening in every July. We could probably have something of constant reviewing of how these principles are implemented. Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you, Mio. Dr. Marat, let me ask you this. When we're talking about institutional frameworks, the AMDC in some ways is an institution in regional governance. And I'm sure it would be just wonderful to actually hear from you very briefly, but how do you actually create a governance ecosystem that's able to work with multiple stakeholders, multiple country governments in the region to actually achieve the vision that you set out?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. You can imagine that it has not been, it's very complex because we have to deal on so many levels. First, we have to deal with different stakeholders. Of course, our main are the governments, but we also have to deal with the private sector, civil society. The Africa Mining Vision was really a momentum created by civil society at the time in 2009. So we carry the message from the civil society when there was the social license to operate, all these things, and questioning why Africa was not benefiting. So we have a big stakeholders in our database, talk about database of civil society. So we have, and we operate at the regional level, at the African Union regional level, but we also have to deal with the sub-regional entities, the regional economic communities, SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, UMA, and the Central Africa. And, we have 55 countries. And then, of course, we have the national as well. So as you can imagine, there are so many layers of collaboration, coordination that needs to take place. Fortunately, we have other institutions that are also working on similar issues, but not duplicating, that we coordinate with. The African Development Bank, UNDP Africa also works on that. Afrexim Bank now is also on board. So it's a lot of coordination, collaboration that is being done. And these because we have phases. AMDC was first created as a project under the UNECA, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So in that first phase, our main monitoring the implementation of the Africa Mining Vision was an issue. So we needed to have monitoring and evaluation at every level, because we can't really monitor. There are many reforms that were done since 2009, attributed directly or not to the Africa Mining Vision, but out of the 20, out of the 55 countries, we consider 20 are the ones that are, dependent on their minerals for their economy, the most dependent ones. So out of the 20, all of them have made some reforms towards their policies. Directly related to the AMV or not. So we see that as but we can't have a critical mass of reform or transforming if it's fragmented. So we have to go with the sub-regional, the SADC, etc. Because if you see, for instance, the biggest and the minister from Ghana mentioned the Bloomberg study of 2021 that found that there was cost and emissions advantage to having a precursor plant in the Democratic Republic of Congo compared to China, compared to Poland, and compared to the USA. It was a compelling finding that we use. But to do that, for instance, if you have a precursor plant in the DRC, you don't need to have them in Mozambique. So you have to leverage. If Mozambique has graphite and it can use the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to have a preferential rate to ship to. And then, of course, you need to also the movement of people. It's a complex issue because each country at the end of the day is sovereign. And African Union, unfortunately, or all the decisions are not binding. Or if they approve the African Mining Vision, or if they approve even some of it's not binding. It's not mandatory. So we have to have frameworks of collaboration that are also at that level. So I'm just saying it's very complex. And I know like ASEAN is also wants to have a vision. They invited AMDC to talk about our vision last week. I couldn't go physically to Kuala Lumpur, but we are very much encouraged to see that others are also trying, and they can learn the lessons from our. Of course, each continent is different, but there are learns about intergovernmental issues that some of it could for us. We have 15 years of experience, so to speak, good and bad, and I have to say, but we can also learn the lessons from the bad. I mean, it's a learning process. It's a learning process because it's complex by nature at all levels, and this is very capital intensive, as you know. It's very entrenched, and and also emotionally binding as well, because it's not just health, for example. It's minerals are very entrenched to the colonial past, all of these things, so it can get very emotional as well. So it's a complex issue that needs to be tackled. We are learning along the way. We have learned so many lessons that we need to deal with a lot of these complexities. But we are ready to share some of our experiences, like I said, good and bad, all the lessons learned at this level. And hopefully, at the end of the day, we want transformed people. At the end of the day, that's what we want, whether it's prosperity, whether it's environmentally, but at the end of the day, we want lives to be better. So until we get that result, we're not going to be satisfied.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Merit. With that, I'm conscious of time. Greg and Amy, to you both of you play a very important role in being able to convene governments and industry. A question to both of you, what in your experience so far and going forward are some of the key pillars that would form this guiding framework for both governments and industry alike in different regions to actually be able to move towards mainstreaming ESG compliance within their day-to-day businesses and operations and policy thinking. Greg, I don't know if you or Amy, whoever one of you can just go first.
Go ahead, Amy.
I'll be really brief. First of all, I was looking for the hands clapping reaction so I could offer that to right before me. So great comments made here. I'd say these key components. One is that more responsible, less harmful mining is perfectly achievable right now. I mean, I so look forward to 20 years of innovation, what will be there, but we already know how to do it better. We don't need to wait 20 years to figure out how to do it. We just need to have a market and government expectations that reward and demand that this reduced harm happens. And transparency comes in. This industry is very used to being 10 clicks away from the end product and the end purchaser, which has given it a lot of being hidden in shadows and then reduced incentive to reduce harm. So we're there now, and this opportunity to increase that transparency as a fundamental expectation, what's happening at these sites, communities should know, they should be able to ask. These benefits agreement models that you all are working on, fantastic. And then also the end brand purchasers have so much ability now to help create a market that rewards that. And they are much closer now to their raw materials because of the competition for these materials, and have a chance to really support rather than be in conflict with civil society. And Greg, I hand to you.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And I'll just pick up on what you were saying, in that I totally agree that, we know what needs to be done. We don't have to wait 20 years. And I guess the way one thing I look at it is, historically, the mining sector has been really investment centered. It's all like investment and finance has really kind of driven the sector. And we know, that doesn't result in the outcomes that we're looking for. And a simple way to describe it is that the mining sector has to change and has to redefine itself. But it has to be more people-centered, right? And I think picking up on what you're saying, Amy, and Merit as well, So it's not something that we don't know, but it really is a fundamental change to the sector to move away from being investment driven to being people focused. And when I talk about people focused, that includes ecosystem services and the nature that people benefit from. So I lump kind of environment and social in there together, and stakeholder engagement. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing examples where existing mine sites are being shut down, and that doesn't solve the problem. And so we have to do it differently, and I think we know how we do it. But that's moving to a people-centered approach is a really fundamental shift that takes a lot, and I agree with the elements that Amy was talking about.
Right. Thank you, Greg. And before I hand it off to Divyam to close the session out, I do want to thank all of you. I know everyone's in different time zones, so but our shared love for this subject, I think, hopefully has brought us all together. But and I'm sure we can spend several hours talking a lot more about this, and it needs a lot more deeper conversations. But this is just the beginning, and I do want to thank all of you very sincerely to take the time and engage with us, and we do hope to continue this engagement with each of you. But as I hand it off to Divyam, what's most encouraging for me is to already start seeing the potential for partnerships from the comments from Ghana, India, from what Marit said about regional cooperation and how to structure governance, and what Miho talked about in terms of being able to facilitate a much more fair play for these countries in the global trade ecosystem. And Greg and Amy, to your points on how do you make all of this ultimately people-centric and community-centric, and not forget about who makes the core of the system as we move along. With that, Divyam, over to you.
Thank you, Aditya, for that excellent moderation, and I think you summed it up quite well, bringing out the key points. I think what's also exciting is that with the platform, we also look forward to a lot more of these conversations. So this is not a full stop. This is definitely a comma in that context. But I would say that in terms of next steps, we will be sort of summarizing the key points that were discussed today from the webinar, and this will of course be circulated among the attendees. The recording will be available on the website. I've put the link in the chat. But also over the next few weeks, as we start to roll out the activities under the different pillars of work that Sandeep mentioned around research insights, capacity building, collaboration, partnerships, we're really looking forward to strengthening our partnerships with many of the institutions that are represented here on the government side, civil society side, industry side, but also the multilateral and the bilateral frameworks that already exist. I think we definitely do not want to duplicate, but what we do want to do is complement the existing frameworks that already exist and see how we can deploy them faster and deliver more concrete support to governments. I think what's very clear is sort of we have a common vision. I think it's amazing that almost all of the speakers, or many of the speakers here, were also on the UNSG panel call yesterday. So I think the fact that the global South voices and the really need and the importance of South-South cooperation and the need to focus on a people-centered approach and value addition is really resonating and becoming mainstream across a number of these platforms. I think what that takes us to next step is really understanding what the nuts and bolts of making that happen is, and how can we translate that at the country level, working with governments, but more importantly also engaging with communities and making sure that equitable benefit sharing becomes a reality for all as we accelerate the energy transition. With that, I also want to, at the outset, express our gratitude for the support extended to us by Climate Works Foundation that is making this work possible for us. And with that, allow me to close this meeting. I wish you all a pleasant day ahead, and hoping that we can continue this dialogue and action on this topic moving forward. Thank you.